Hey everyone, welcome back to this explainer. I am so thrilled you're joining me today because, well, we're looking at something just truly fascinating. We are going to deconstruct an absolute masterclass in professional anime horror expression. Specifically, we'll be looking at a seriously spine-chilling story known as Walking Alone. Look, if you've ever wanted to understand how a story manages to get right under your skin, completely bypass your logical brain, and tap directly into your deepest fears, you are in the exact right place. We're going to break down exactly how this narrative achieves that deep sense of dread using the visual structure we've got to guide us right through the anatomy of terror.
I want you to just listen to this for a second. Even though there was no one around me, suddenly I saw a shadow on the ground stretching out to me. Just let that sink in. That is the exact moment our protagonist realizes the rules of reality have completely broken down. It's that awful, chilling realization that you are not, in fact, alone. This single line perfectly establishes the atmospheric dread that we're going to explore today.
Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to the anatomy of professional anime horror. For the rest of this explainer, we're going to use an analytical lens to really tear apart the mechanics of fear. We aren't just looking at what happens, right? We're looking at exactly how the story makes you feel it. How do the animation, the pacing, and the environment all come together to create such a profound sense of unease? So let's break it all down into its core pillars.
Starting right off with our first major pillar, isolation and environmental dread.
So, the story starts by isolating our protagonist in a place that should feel entirely safe and familiar. Imagine this. Our protagonist is at the Eden Hill School Library, just grinding away studying for final exams. The school kept the doors open all the way until midnight. So, choosing the quiet library over their nearby home, the student gets completely absorbed in their studying. And you know, the trap is set perfectly here, because the horror relies entirely on twisting a mundane, safe space into a prison of isolation. Look at the difference here. At 8 a.m., it's just a normal routine, right? There are still other students around, a safety net, and busy streets right outside. But then, by 10 p.m., the environment has fundamentally shifted into a haunted reality. There's absolute silence in the library and completely empty streets outside. This stark contrast between safety and this sudden total isolation heavily heightens the protagonist's vulnerability. They are entirely alone.
Which brings us right into mapping the terror and understanding the suspense curve.
You see, professional anime horror expression doesn't just throw a monster at you right out of the gate, it builds. Instead of relying on cheap jump scares, this narrative meticulously escalates the terror in 3 distinct steps. It makes you sit in the discomfort as the protagonist tries to escape. Step 1, it starts purely with audio. In the absolute dead silence of the library, the protagonist hears the distinct, erratic sound of someone limping. This sensory detail really anchors the dread early on because it's just so unnatural. Then, step 2, the protagonist runs out only to spot a fleeting woman standing at the very end of the long school corridor. They call out, "Who's there?" and boom, she instantly vanishes. The tension absolutely spikes. And then, step 3, the protagonist escapes to the street, exhausted, looking down at the ground, only to see a shadow stretching out toward them from behind. It's such a brilliant, escalating sequence, going from hearing the threat to catching a quick glimpse of it to the terrifying realization that has followed you out into the open world.
And that leads us directly into our next focus, expressing the grotesque entity.
So when our protagonist finally lifts their head from looking at that stretching shadow, they see the woman walking right in front of them. This is where we see the absolute peak of professional anime horror expression. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how her visual cues aggressively subvert our basic expectations of normal human motion. I mean, look at the details. Tattered, dirty clothes, messy, unkempt hair. It immediately strips away her humanity. But the real horror, it's in the twisted hands and feet. This results in a completely disabled, agonizingly slow limping movement. She is moving so slowly that our protagonist actually quickly catches up to her. But her appearance is so deeply wrong that it triggers this massive primal fear. The protagonist's gut is literally screaming at them not to go any closer. It completely strips away their courage to just walk right past her. This subversion of natural movement is a total hallmark of elite anime horror.
Which brings us to the climax, the confrontation and the escape.
Our protagonist is completely frozen in fear, stopped dead in their tracks on a totally empty street, completely unable to overtake this slow-moving nightmare. The twisted entity confronts them, asking a strange, seemingly impossible question. So I have to ask you, how do you answer a ghost? I want you to really put yourself in the protagonist's shoes for a second here. Your brain just goes completely numb. You are paralyzed by shock. You're standing face to face with an entity whose very existence breaks all the laws of nature, and she's asking you a question you don't even understand. What do you actually do in that moment?
Well, in an act of pure, unadulterated panic, the protagonist simply points far away. They don't know what she's asking or who she's looking for, they just desperately need her to go away. And terrifyingly enough, the ghost accepts this. She limps off in the exact direction the protagonist pointed, walking so far away that she eventually just disappears from sight.
But, as you can probably guess, the terror isn't over. The protagonist, absolutely terrified that she might reappear, runs as fast as they physically can, desperately looking for a car, a person, literally anyone to help. And then, cutting right through the quiet night, they hear the woman screaming from far, far away. She is here. The sheer psychological weight of that phrase echoing through the empty street is so completely overwhelming that our protagonist just completely passes out on the ground, only to be found way later by a neighbor.
Let's move to and see how this builds into our final pillar of anime horror, tragic lore, and Agatha's story.
You know, the monster is rarely just a monster, right? There's almost always a deeply human tragedy anchoring the horror to the real world. Our protagonist later learns the truth from their neighbor, and it completely shifts how we view the entity we just saw. Her name is Agatha. She was a 32-year-old woman. She isn't some demon or a random malicious spirit. She is actually a grieving mother whose spirit is trapped by profound grief, endlessly roaming the Eden Hill School and the surrounding streets. Suddenly, that twisted, limping figure asking a strange question isn't just a physical threat anymore. She's a literal manifestation of absolute, unbearable sorrow. So the crucial point is that this timeline perfectly captures how unending grief creates the absolute most compelling and terrifying anime horror lore. Back in 1998, Agatha's 10-year-old daughter dies in a horrible, tragic accident while playing at Eden Hill School. The transformation happens because Agatha simply cannot bear the thought of losing her child, and she actually passes away from the sheer weight of that grief, which leads directly to the present day, where Agatha's ghost wanders around desperately asking strangers where her lost child is, still hoping beyond hope to be reunited with her daughter. Those twisted limbs and the agonizing limp we discussed earlier, they are literal physical expressions of a soul crippled by a tragedy it just cannot move past.
Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. This explainer has broken down how environment, pacing, visual subversion, and tragic lore all combine to create top-tier professional anime horror expression. But honestly, the real horror is how it plays on our own vulnerabilities when we're alone in the dark. So I'm going to leave you with this. If you ever find yourself walking alone at night, and in the absolute silence, you hear the slow, erratic sound of limping footsteps coming up behind you, who will you point to when she asks for her daughter? Thanks for joining me on The Explainer today, and keep asking the deep questions.